I know in Zoom it says, but I'm still
Re-
seeing the blue. It hasn't even gone. Okay, now it is. Hi, everybody. Well, this is going to be a test of when we went live. Lex and I are generally trying to figure out when exactly do we end up on Facebook and what happens after the fact. So anyway, welcome everybody. This is a live to tape taping of Judaism Unbound. It is our midweek bonus edition. I want to give you a little bit of a roadmap for those of you who are following along very closely. This is the midweek bonus edition. On Friday, we are going to have an interview on the podcast with Stephen Windmuller. That was already recorded live. And then next week, we are not going to have a midweek bonus edition. That's because we're doing two. We're going to still be recording at these times, but that's because we're going to be doing two interviews next week. On Monday, we're going to be interviewing Josh Lesser, and that's going to be the following Friday's show. And on Tuesday, we're going to be interviewing Casper ter Kuile, and that show is going to be released in about a month when his book comes out. So this is not the last midweek bonus edition, but is the last midweek bonus edition. And next week will not be one. Anyway, that is pretty much it. So now we're going to record this week's bonus edition. And we've recorded a couple of titles in advance because we don't really know which one it's going to be, but we'll just start with one now anyway, just to make Lex's life easier for the editing if it does turn out to be this one. So here we go. This is a special bonus episode of Judaism Unbound, Evolving Mammals. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Dan Liebenson.
and I'm Lex Rofberg.
And we are here for another midweek bonus edition of Judaism Unbound, just to remind folks that what we're doing in these midweek editions is a form of futurism. We're just talking about what we're experiencing now during the coronavirus period, the social distancing, physical distancing period, and trying to put it together with what we've been talking about on Judaism Unbound all along, trying to at least theorize a little bit about where we might be going in terms of Judaism moving forward. And in theory, on the Friday episodes of Judaism Unbound, we want those to be regular episodes of Judaism Unbound. We've also been talking about coronavirus, COVID-19 related things over the last few weeks, because really that's what's on people's minds. But we are going to soon move off of that and move in the direction of other topics that we've always been interested in Judaism Unbound. And of course, they're going to be related to the time that we've just experienced, the time that we are experiencing. So it's not like you can stop talking about it, but we are going to start to move in the direction of just general topics of interest. So we're excited about that. But over the next couple of weeks, we are still going to have some guests on Judaism Unbound that are more directly talking about what we're experiencing now. Stephen Windmuller this coming Friday, and Josh Lesser a week from Friday. And we're really excited about those. So Lex, I wanted to jump in. Really, we're picking up on what we left off a week ago. We, just to remind listeners, last week we had an episode entitled A New Planet, and we were talking about kind of a theoretical reality if the Jews all of a sudden came to a new planet and they were all living in a new place, in a fundamentally new place. I mean, that's the thing that I really want to emphasize in these conversations, that we are thinking about what would it look like if we were really starting from scratch. You know, there's that joke about the Jew who's found on a desert island and he's built two synagogues, and they kind of say, why did you build two synagogues? He says, well, this is the one I pray in, and that's the one I would never step foot in. You know, that's a joke because, of course, that wouldn't really happen. In fact, if the Jew was on a desert island, he probably wouldn't build any synagogues. You know, and the question is, and who we had a conversation, right, where with somebody, who was it,
Andrew Hahn.
Andrew Hahn, who talked about, you know, if he were on a desert island, what would he bring, what would his Judaism be like? So maybe we should flash back to that episode, because that's really, I think, what we're talking about. I wanted to connect some of the dots in terms of the theory of where we are, and maybe to frame today's conversation, just because I was sort of explaining to a friend who actually doesn't listen to Judaism Unbound some of what we've been talking about the other day. And it was useful for me to lay that out for him. And I would say that what we want to pick up is that we were starting to think about two topics that we haven't done a lot of work on yet on our sort of combined entities, Judaism Unbound, Jewish Live, any of that stuff, which are community building and creativity. meaning helping people be creative. We've talked about those things, of course. We've talked about the substance, the ideas behind those things, but they haven't yet been things that we've really had an initiative of, for example, right, having some kind of gathering where people can break off into small rooms and talk to build community, right, or actual gatherings online, of course, where people are actually engaging in Jewish creativity as opposed to thinking about it. We want to move in some of those directions. We want the world to move in some of those directions. So that's part of what we want to talk about today. But before we do, I wanted to put a little bit of theory together. So there's two things that I think are really important that I want to emphasize. One is that from our perspective, and Lex, I'd love to get your take on this or how you think about this, but at least from my perspective, and I think also from yours, nothing happened with the advent of the coronavirus that is new from our perspective, right? Meaning that what is happening is accelerating forces that we thought were already in play. And yes, of course, there are new ways that we didn't conceive of about why these forces would be accelerated. But I think that we're still basically saying that what we think is going to happen on the other end of this is related to what we were talking about 4 years ago, in the sense that the large forces are still the same large forces, meaning the old institutions of Jewish life and the many of the conceptions of Jewish life, the conceptions that undergird what we might call rabbinic Judaism or its 20th century variant, were already in a sort of decay, and they were being challenged. As B'nai Lappi says, they were crashing. And now really this is just an acceleration, and this is bringing basically everybody, every Jew and every Jewish adjacent person into the same experience where the institutions that they knew and loved are crashing by virtue of the fact that they were basically built around physical gatherings for the most part, and those are impossible. And so almost by definition, your Judaism is crashing. Now, that's one piece. The other piece that I wanted to talk about is just that there has been what you could call a major insult, a major event, right, which is the coronavirus, COVID-19. And I'm thinking of this as, and I want to say this with a preface that I'm going to talk about dinosaurs, but not in the way that people generally think and talk about dinosaurs as it regards to the Jewish community, right? I am not saying that the old Jewish institutions, the mainstream, the legacy Jewish institutions. I'm not saying they're dinosaurs in the way like they're old and decrepit. That's not my point. My point is that dinosaurs were very large. And in the story of the death of the dinosaurs, right, basically my understanding of the most current science is that there was some kind of meteor strike, right, some kind of an insult, a sudden insult that that caused the food supply to be harmed, because all of a sudden there was all this dust in the air, and the food was not growing in the same way, right? The sun was covered up, and that fundamentally what happened was that when the food supply dried up, the largest animals died first. Why? Because they need a tremendous amount of food just to live from one day to the next day. And so the most vulnerable actually turn out to be the most powerful. That's both metaphorically a powerful idea, and also I think a descriptively valuable idea to understand that the biggest organizations are the ones that are in the most danger, not because there's anything wrong with them, but in fact because their bigness is part of their vulnerability. So Lex, let's start there, and I just want to check in with you so far whether this is descriptively valuable for you.
Yeah, it is. There's a lot there, and I want to see if we can get to the different pieces over the course of this episode. The desert island piece, I wanna hone in on for a second, because I think it's similar, and also it's worth bringing up the ways that it's different. So the desert island that we talked about with Andrew Hahn, kind of the whole point of that was the deserted piece. It was that he was alone. Like, the idea was, to what extent, if you were doing Jewish by yourself in an area that nobody else was in touch with you, what would it look like? And that's a question that I think is really important right now. And it's one that I think, and we talked about this within the last few weeks. I think it's one that we're not asking quite as much as the flip side, which is not a desert island question, at least as I understand it. It's more, or I guess maybe it's like the show Lost, where there's like a whole bunch of people on the desert island, but like it's the community question. It's specifically not how do you create Judaism for like one person to observe solo, but rather how do we create an entire ecosystem of Jewish things for people to share with one another. And I think on the creativity front, some interesting things happen, because even, me, who like the two of us spend all of our time trying to think outside the realm of traditional legacy institutions. Like the second I start talking about migrating communities online, it's a lot harder for me to really be as creative as I would like to be, and that I think I am able to be on an individual level. When I think about the desert island question, when I think about like Jews on their own creating their own Jewish practices, like it's very easy for me to think of, here's a million different ways that people could customize stuff for themselves, and that folks could like stitch together beautiful elements of the Jewish past to create their own practices. When it gets to the community level, all of a sudden I flash to like, this is what a synagogue has looked like. And what version of that do we create? And I think like we've been sort of running against that hurdle together as we have these conversations. And that's why we specifically wanted to like make today, this is going to be the creativity piece that's not just mapping those existing institutions into our current digital ecosystem that we're inhabiting, both by necessity and to some extent by choice, because it's an acceleration of what's happened before. So
right. Well, the reason why I wanted to be talking about that dinosaur metaphor is specifically for this reason, which is to say that when the dinosaurs die because they need a lot of food, what's left are two kinds of animals. There's the medium-sized animals, which may be able to make it through that period of the food restriction, right? The period after the meteor hits. And then there's the small animals. The medium animals, I think, potentially make it through and then die afterwards because the situation on the other end has changed. It's those really small animals, the mammals, that are profoundly different from the dinosaurs, that are the ones that are left. And that's where I think the creativity connection comes in, right? Is because the mammals are profoundly different from the dinosaurs. They're a profoundly different kind of animal. First of all, they're smaller, and second of all, they're just not they're not built on the same structure at all. And so the question then becomes, once you start thinking about the evolution of the mammals, right, and in past periods of Jewish history, right, those mammals may have been the rabbis, who are profoundly different from the priests, for example, then it becomes very questionable whether the things that the priests did are relevant at all. So let me give you an example of something that's coming up relatively soon, but not so soon, and that bears a lot of talking about, which is the high holidays. So I think it's tempting for people to think about the high holidays, even if they're admitting that the high holidays are not going to happen in synagogues and in person. I think what's tempting for people is to think about the high holidays on the structure of what the high holidays were back in the age of synagogues. Okay, so we can't have in-person services, so what can we have online that's like services? But that's not the way that rabbinic Judaism responded to the destruction of the Second Temple. But historically, maybe we don't really know what happened in the early years. But in retrospect, right, they said the high holidays, just talking about the high holidays, they became profoundly different in the rabbinic age than they were in the temple age. They didn't say, what can we do that's kind of like a sacrifice? They said, we're going to do something completely different. So that's where I think that I'm trying to reorient us to think not like those medium-sized dinosaurs, but to think like the mammals, and to say, what would it look like if the high holidays, we started from scratch on the high holidays, right? And we said, what is the point of the high holidays? By the way, I'm not even convinced that the point of the high holidays is atonement, because in the rabbinic era, the point of the high holidays was atonement. But in the temple era, the point of the high holidays was communal atonement, not individual atonement. So it may be that the very purpose of the high holidays changes, as certainly the observance of it changes. And I want to try to think about that from the perspective of the mammal and not from the perspective of the dinosaur.
So yeah, I think I'm starting to better understand where you're going. So the high holidays are a good case because it's very, very abundantly clear. I mean, this is usually true, but it's certainly the case that what we think of as the high holidays today is like astronomically different from what it was a few hundred years ago. I mean, the extent to which synagogues are what come to mind when we think of the high holidays is relatively new, for example. But certainly beyond that, it's super different from, I mean, the names of the high holidays are not the same as in the Torah. Like the phrase Rosh Hashanah doesn't exist in the Torah. That's not there. Like the idea that to do what you just did, you're not convinced that it's atonement. Like I think a lot of people would take as a given that one of the core elements of the high holidays is that it's the new year. Not clear that it's the new year in the Torah. It says specifically it's not the new year. It's the seventh month.
Right.
Which still, by the way, the seventh month is the halfway point. It's not nothing. It's the first day of the seventh month is still a notable moment in a 12-month year. But like, yeah, let's throw it all up in the air and see what lands. I mean, and by the way, to go back to what you said about how this is accelerating existing processes, like, yeah, we've already argued that the high holidays especially need a huge, I mean, beyond a makeover, a real revisiting, because like if there's just so much that nobody even pretends to really be engaged by in a lot of high holiday services. So like if we flip it and asked what like for people planning high holiday somethings, if I were to, and I'm one of these people, like if I were to start from the place of what do I want this to, like what pieces of essence of the high holidays do I want to come through? What do I want folks to experience in Rosh Hashanah through Yom Kippur, as opposed to, okay, this is the Siddur we've used, the prayer book we've used. Here's all the stuff we've had in there. What pieces are we going to cut? Like those two processes are super different. And I think they get at the mammals question, the mammals point that you're making. Like if you think that the dinosaurs just need to be a little smaller, and as opposed to entire new organisms need to arise, then that's when you look at the prayer book and say, there's these 75 things that we say, these Hebrew chants and prayers, these English readings, these et cetera, et cetera. We're going to cut 25% because we know people can't pay attention for as long on Zoom. Mm-hmm. Like that's a different process than high holidays at the end of the day boils down to a collective awakening. So for me, this is my process. I'm not like, this is an example, not necessarily correct for everyone. If I were to do this, I would say, so this boils down to a collective awakening. Shofar, that's a good thing for collective awakening. I think that we should have shofar happen in some form. I'm not particularly wedded to particular forms, but there should be some kind of collective awakening. Shofar does that. I do think that that atonement, maybe not as the core thing, but I think that there is a thread of atonement that I would like people to experience. I'm with you on the collectivity part of it, that I don't want people only to be like, I messed up in this way, I messed up in this way, but rather a collective. And I think that for me, like the ritual of Tashlich does that. Now we're not going to go to a river. That's traditionally what people do with Tashlich, is they go to a river and throw bread in or throw some kind of ritual item in to cast away sins. Like we're not going to do that in the same way. So my question then becomes, what is this digital Tashlich? And then I like the Torah readings and the Haftorah readings, and I find them thought provoking. To me, if I were to like those, that's it. That's like that's like the stuff I think is best about the high holidays. If I were to have my dream service or set of services, it would be honing in on those things. And like, would we do Avinu Malkeinu a bunch of times? The Our Father, Our King prayer that pops up? Like, I don't know. I don't know if Avinu Malkeinu, even in the synagogue or anywhere, is all that engaging. I don't know that it really aligns in the English with people's visions of what their theology is. I don't know that it's particular, like people know it. They like have associations with the melodies that are sung for it, but like, I'm not convinced that that needs to stay. And I think that when, if we were starting from that process of, we're going to thin out and we're going to choose like the most essential prayers, like Avinu Malkeinu would make the cut. Like it's a biggie, right?
Okay,
like,
I want to challenge you to think
Yeah.
about this in a different way, though.
Yeah.
I want to challenge you to the things you just listed a bunch of things that you would keep. I want you to think about what the high holidays would be like, how you could imagine creating something with none of those. With those things are all banned. The things that you just said you like, the things that that meaning, yeah, I'd love to know how you go about thinking about that.
Okay, I mean, so I would still have a similar process where I would distill to what I want, to some general emotional valences of this time period. And then I would seek to have those emotional valences like be expressed to a community of people. So collective awakening would be one of them.
Awakening to what?
I want people to walk out of whatever experience they're in and feel, oh my gosh, I have just been called to action to better our world. Like I'm just talking about like the oh my gosh, something just like struck me. It's like literally waking up. Like I was asleep and now I'm awake. That is something I would like people to feel, and what I seek to feel with these days. Being and associated with that is being better both as an individual and in our collectives. So finding ways to do our part to make our society more whole. Now, I think I think part of what you're getting at is like, I'm not full, like, I'm even thinking about the dinosaurs mammals metaphor. Like a lot of dinosaurs have 4 legs and mammals also have 4 legs.
Right.
I'm not convinced that what you're saying about how like none of them.
No, I'm not saying that none of them can be. I'm challenging us to think as if none of them can be, right?
Yeah.
Meaning, and then we can come back around on the other side and say, but what if maybe there are legs, so we can still walk somewhere, right? That a mammal can walk somewhere and a dinosaur can walk somewhere. So if walking somewhere was part of the old tradition, like then we can still do that. The question on the other end of the design, the sort of creativity process is, do we still want to, or have we now discovered something even better? Right. So like what I want to say about the shift to rabbinic Judaism from Second Temple Judaism is that there could have been sacrifices involved in rabbinic Judaism. There was nothing stopping sacrifices. They had a belief that the sacrifice, a late belief in Judaism, that the sacrifices could only be legitimately made in the temple in Jerusalem. That was a relatively recent development. And well, I mean, by the time of rabbinic Judaism, it wasn't so recent anymore, but it was a late First Temple development. And they could have said, hey, that was the Second Temple period, but in the First Temple we brought sacrifices everywhere, and so now again we're going to bring sacrifices to everywhere. It's actually the old time religion. We're actually going back to it. They could have done that. That was to me, that's the 4 legs analogy. Like, yeah, they could have, but they didn't. And so I want to suggest that, like, before we try to talk about what we can retain, that we should talk about, let's imagine that we couldn't retain anything, and let's see what we would come up with.
Right. And I think I'm with you. I want to do that. I also think that we should know as we do it that it's never actually completely new. Like,
Sure.
Like we should know that. And like what I would say is they made 3, they ditched all the sacrifices. They didn't have to. You're totally right. Like that's clear. And then they made 3 things that had the names in Hebrew of sacrifices, and they were prayer services. Like that's what they did. And so that's part of why my initial instinct was to look at shofar. Like it doesn't need to be a ram's horn that is particularly used. It doesn't need to be the 4 sounds that are associated with shofar. I do think that in some form or another, there's often a mapping that happens where you take where you take something and you pretend it's the same. I mean, that's kind of what, like, I think it's important. That's why I'm like emphasizing this. I'm not trying to like fight against you. It's like,
right.
you play a game of make-believe where you do something new, but you pretend it's a continuation of the old. And
Right.
I think that's what could be necessary with high holidays. And I think that we could, like, so yeah, so the things that we could do that are entirely new, I think there's all sorts of specifically digital and other individualized things that don't need to be digital, that could just be communicated digitally for people to then do in their own places. Like, I think that there's many methods of getting at sort of collective awakening, bettering the world and ourselves. I think that for me, arguing for something similar to Tashlich is more along the lines of, I was actually just reading an article, I think it was thetorah.com, that gave it gave like a catalog of like a dozen different scapegoat kind rituals all around the ancient Near East that were not that like predate the one we think is sort of the original scapegoat ritual. Like, to me, I'm talking about a broad idea of putting our sins onto some kind of physical object, whether it's bread, whether it's a scapegoat, whether it's anything. I think that some version of that is useful and transcends the specifics of like the way a holiday has been manifesting in one era or another. So that's what I would want us to do.
Except the one thing to note is that the vast majority of American Jews today have no idea what Tashlich is. Now, we might want to say, oh, great, we want to actually bring it back. So I wouldn't start with the assumption that Tashlich is something that we're retaining. I would actually almost start with the thinking that Tashlich is actually something, like you were saying earlier, something old new that we're restoring. Yes, some people have been practicing it, but very few. In terms of the people that we're talking about, right? There's at least two kinds of people, right? The people who think there are only two kinds of people, and the other kind, no. But there's two kinds of people. There's the people who kind of go to synagogue on the high holidays, and there's the people who don't. The people who don't, the question to me is, well, why weren't they? What were they trying to get out of it? Maybe nothing, but maybe there's be something that would be of interest to them that was never conceivable before, because everybody was always working on the assumption that whatever we do, it has to kind of be anchored on the synagogue service idea that takes place in the building, so we could have some nice add-ons or something. And somehow that wasn't generally working. It wasn't getting those people to come. So one question is like, is there something that could happen now that would be both relevant and interesting to all of those folks? And then there's the people who do come to synagogue, right, on the high holidays, of which there are two subsets, I think. One group are people that are like, actually religious in a deep way, and actually think that some kind of deep atonement is going on there. And the other group, which is the much larger group, that has some vestigial sense of obligation. It's not totally clear to them or to anyone. Of course, there are exceptions, but it's not so clear why they're there. It feels like the right thing to do. They're not really understanding the prayers very deeply, so they're not really atoning that much. They may be feeling a certain sense of atonement. I don't know. I don't think that they're having a collective wake up. So again, if there's something that we're trying to achieve there, then let's actually achieve it. But so I think that it's good to sort of lay all that out, because then we might say, hey, look, Tashlich, which is, again, just for people who don't know, like Tashlich is this idea that you walk down the river and you symbolically put your sins onto bread crumbs, and you throw the bread into the river to sort of cast off your sins. And it was actually a folk custom that the rabbis traditionally hated and eventually adopted because the people liked it so much. I agree with you; it's powerful. So, and by the way, I don't think it's the case that people are stuck in their homes on the high holiday. I don't think it's the case that they're stuck on Zoom. I think it could easily be the case that when we rethink the high holidays, that we imagine it as a form of non-collective individual going off into nature, and maybe you do find a source of running water. Maybe it doesn't have to be water. Maybe it can be some other way. Maybe you attach it to a tree or something. You put it under, you dig a hole and you put your sins underground or whatever that might be. There's all kinds of ways to imagine doing something that that I think could be very powerful for people. And so I wonder, for example, what would it look like? This is just an example. I'm not advocating for this because I'm really mostly building off of what I'm hearing you talking about and what I'm hearing you say works for you. And I'm saying, like, well, if the Second Temple practice of the high holidays was really about communal atonement, and the rabbinic version of the high holidays was about individual atonement in a collective setting, what if the third version of the high holidays is about individual atonement in a individual setting, and we elevate the idea of what's called hipodedut, the idea of being alone with yourself? And yes, of course, people will say, well, but we're alone all the time in this coronavirus period. We don't want that. Well, two things. Number one, first of all, that's only going to last for a certain period of time. Maybe after that, we're actually going to be so tired of being with people, we're going to actually think fond feelings back to the coronavirus times, and the high holidays will be our annual time to reenact the coronavirus period and to have this time alone where we can really be alone with our thoughts. I mean, maybe, but it just feels like if we can sort of take some of those ideas further, and then I always like when I learned from a really amazing professional design thinking group leader. He said, when you're doing brainstorming, the early round should be where you think about things that are what he called the 3 I's: illegal, immoral, and impractical. And you come up with all kinds of crazy ideas. And then the later rounds, you pull them back into the realm of legal, moral, and practical. And then you have something that's just on the edge of possible, right? Whereas if you go kind of based on where we currently are, then you end up with something that's not that far away from where we've been. So that's kind of where I'd like to spend some time, just almost demonstrating what it looks like if we go, into that really crazy zone and then try to sort of pull it back.
I'm really interested in what you said about the stages. So the collective atonement in the temple times being a clear cut agenda item, and then the individual atonement in a collective setting, and then I'm really interested in that, and I'm feeling both directions, which I like, because that's like what happens at the beginning of a discernment process, is you feel tugged in both. I like. So first off, here's what the biggest thing I want to emphasize: this isn't only digital. Even if we're not in a synagogue, it's so easy to pretend that the possibilities are synagogue or digital. And I actually think it benefits institutions to talk about the alternative to them as nothingness or only digital. What you said is so important. We still have access to outside. There's nothing. All of the social distancing measures that I've seen all around the country have, as part of them, specifically underlining you can still take walks, you should still take walks, make sure that you stay 6 feet away from, you absolutely should.
I've taken more walks in this period than I ever have.
Yeah, and the street adjoining my own has been closed to traffic. A bunch of streets in Providence have been closed to traffic, so that they only are meant to be walking, so that you can have more people without them being close touching together on the sidewalks. They can spread out more. And so there were 30, 40 people walking over the course of a bunch of blocks. They're not right next to each other, but I was there yesterday. So that's a really good point. What if whatever we're doing this year, we don't conceive of as, we can't do the in-person, quote unquote, we have to do the digital. What if we instead thought of it as, a lot of what we are going to do is going to be digital. We're going to maybe be in a space to have a sense of collective, of community, etc. But what if the mission was what if you had, as part of the service, okay, we're going to leave. Everybody's going to go and walk to the nearest tree. I mean, you said go in nature, you're going to find a tree and you're going to do a kind of tashlich thing at the tree. And then afterwards, we're going to come back and maybe have a discussion. I don't know, do something with it. I'd like us to consider things like that, because in the conversations I'm seeing, it's much more, okay, we have to flip a switch. We were in this place. Now we're in this place. This place now being Zoom, video chat, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not only in that place. And I think on the creativity front, to get to that other key theme of this episode, like we restrict ourselves if we think we are only located in one place. And by the way, this could be a teaching for afterwards. There's no reason we have to stay in the synagogue or in the whatever building for the 3 hours or whatever duration we have for our service. We could easily do this same thing and have in the middle a mandated break where we all have a meditative hippo to do, like individualized experience. And that could be like a new way of doing this. And honestly, that would refresh the heck out of me. I don't think anybody, even people who advocate for specific parts of the existing liturgy, I don't know that there's that many people who are like, yes, the key is you have to have 3 hours of time where you are like doing, like, I don't think anybody really feels that. So you could easily adopt these even afterwards to have moments of solitude, moments of individuality that for me, I do want positioned for the sake of a collective betterment of the world. That's the resistance I felt to go back to the tugboat directions. But I know you're not really saying that it's like this individual thing is only for you. So that I think I'm into it.
Yeah, well, I don't know what I'm saying, right? Meaning that I want to, the way that I'm thinking, and we've been working. I mean, I guess what I want to say in the big picture is that before coronavirus, and I don't know that we've talked about this exactly on the podcast. I'm not sure. I don't remember anymore. But we were in the process of launching a new project, which we had received a grant for and had already done a few prototypes. And it was a way of introducing a process that I think of as, analogous to the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People or Marie Kondo or whatever, that it's a step-by-step process that somebody could learn. And it would be a step-by-step process of reimagining Jewish practices one at a time. And it was inspired before, but it was sort of re-inspired by Tiffany Schlane's Tech Shabbat, by what Kristen Edeko-Posner was doing, and all kinds of other people that are out there doing really interesting one-off experiments on a piece of Judaism. And we wanted to develop this process in a really concrete way, and then kind of introduce it to people and lead people in all kinds of ways in learning, internalizing this process and applying it to various Jewish practices so that they would eventually feel so confident about it that they could just do it all the time on their own without us. I want to go back to that. I want to figure out how to go back to that in the coming weeks in an online forum. So last time we asked people to raise their hand if they were interested in being captains of 10s, captains of 50s. A few people already did. We'd love to hear from you more. We aren't yet sure exactly when and what to do with that, but we will. That's in terms of our community building initiatives. And in terms of our creativity initiatives, I'd love people to identify themselves if they're really interested in being, let's say, on a vanguard of doing some creative thinking about Jewish practices for the coronavirus period and beyond. And to try to help us get that stuff going in a big way, initially online, and maybe after this is over, back again in person. When we talk about the high holidays as a specific application, I'll say a few things. One is that when we've been doing this process, we've been suggesting that people think of it similar to Simon Sinek's TED Talk, where he talks about how it's really important for, what he's talking about, a company to be pushing out from its why. Why does it exist at all? What's it there to do? And then to say that it has a set of hows, meaning some very particular approaches that it has. And then the what, the things that it actually does are kind of what flows from that. Whereas people usually think of it as the company is the what's. And so I think people think the high holidays is its what's. The high holidays is going to services, saying these prayers, reading these Torah portions, having atonement, doing maybe tashlich. That's the way that people tend to describe the high holidays, as opposed to saying the purpose of the high holidays is X. And I think that we have to even ask ourselves whether, not in the post-coronavirus time, I really don't believe that the coronavirus is the cause of the change. I think the coronavirus is the accelerant of the change that happened, like we said 4 years ago on the beginning of the Judaism Unbound podcast. We placed it at the Enlightenment and the Emancipation. I still believe that was 200 years ago or so. I still believe that's where these forces are coming from. These forces like that take a very long time to really take hold and change things. And then they're accelerated by a destruction. I never thought that there was going to be a destruction, but it turns out that there has been a destruction. That's what the coronavirus is. So it's an accelerant. It's the meteor strike that hits and changes the food supply, and that causes the dinosaurs that were already staggering that were already too big, that were already needing more food than they really ought to have. The circumstances have allowed them to grow too big, and now they're dying very quickly. That's what's happening now. Now, the question for me, the question for the mammals is, what should we do? And I think that the first place to start is to say, why are we even doing this? And by the way, I've been having a little bit of like, I don't know about you, like I've been having a little bit of existential angst that is about sort of what we do here, which is that we talk about Judaism all the time. And, I'm like, is that the most important thing in the world? I think it is, if it leads to action, right? I think it was Rabbi Akiva who said, whether it's Torah study or action, the most important thing. And I think Rabbi Akiva said it's Torah study if it leads to action. And so, what I'm saying is that I think that what we need to think about is a purpose for the high holidays that actually leads to action. Like you said, I love the idea that you said that it's about waking up. It's about, now, by the way, I think that the coronavirus has caused a wake up. Like, it's really interesting to me to go out there and see people with masks. I'm really happy to see that, because it feels like people are stepping up, because the mask is not for you. The mask is to help people not be exposed to you. So it reveals a level of social responsibility that I am surprised to see happening at that level. Now, maybe people are mistakenly think it's helping them, and that's why they're doing it. I don't know. But I want to think the best of people that it actually represents some degree of greater social responsibility. So in some ways, my question about the high holidays this year is whether there's a way to ride the wave of some waking up that's already happened, and to say, well, what would it look like if we woke up even more? And, maybe it's more about action. So maybe I wonder if we could imagine a high holidays where the practice is very individual, right? The practice is hitbodedut, aloneness in nature, but the purpose is collective responsibility, right? Collective waking up and taking of responsibility. What would that look like exactly? What would happen? Like, I'm imagining rabbis or whoever, us, creating an audio book, almost like an audio experience, a podcast, where is meant to listen to as you go off on your own into nature and do your thing individually. And there's no collective, there's no, but maybe we come together on Zoom at the very, very end of the day, and something happens, right? And somehow maybe that's where the wake up is, and then we're charged to go out there and change the world. I don't know, something like that. Like, that's where I'd want to start and say, well, what would that look like?
Yeah, I'm flashing back to a couple things. One, and I know we're closing, but I'm flashing to before Passover. We had some conversations that led us, and specifically with Brian Field of Judaism Your Way, and we came to a conclusion that something that could benefit the Passover Seder, and this was before we knew that coronavirus was going to throw everything up in the air in certain ways. Not that the changes were already impressive, but like Brian Field said that he gives assignments to people, but for his Passover Seder, like they have to prepare, and they have to, and like, I kind of think that in order to achieve what you're describing with like the actually doing the thing, like we're coming together or not, we're observing this holiday individually or collectively for the sake of, starting with why, like we are doing it for a purpose. And if you don't achieve that purpose, I'm going to say, and this is like stark, I'm going to say there's like, you failed on some level. Like, I do think that we would all benefit from a sense of like, oh my gosh, I could mess up. I could do this wrong. Like I could do the high holidays and I could leave them and I could not be changed. And I think we would benefit if we felt the way that, I felt going into a test in middle school or high school. Like, there is a chance that I will mess up. I don't think that most people going to most high holiday services of any kind are going in and thinking, oh, I could like do better or worse this year. Like, there's a way that I could do well or do poorly. It's just like, I'm sort of, I'm going to leave, and it will soak in to the extent it soaks in. And like, it's not my fault any direction. Like, it's maybe it's on the leaders, maybe it's just, I'm not going to be changed that much. I think we should see it as like, okay, we have these holidays exist for a purpose. That purpose is roughly to allow for us as individuals to devote ourselves a little bit more towards the betterment of our world and of ourselves. And if we don't do that, like C minus. Deep, like, I think, it's funny because I went to a college where like grades are de-emphasized, and where like there's a lot of, but like I think we need, to me it feels like we have so thoroughly lost any sense that there is a right or wrong, like that one could experience a holiday better or worse, that we're all just sort of passively going through it. And like, oh, maybe we get a nice little emotional, maybe we feel some meaning. Like maybe there's a prayer that touches us for a second, or whatever, but it doesn't, I don't know. I would like us to say, okay, Isaiah says, is this the fast that we have chosen? Like it tells us directly, don't prioritize, silly fasts and individualized things over the clothing of the naked and the like welcoming of the stranger. I'm misquoting, but you get it. Like, are we doing that? And this year I'm going to try to focus on it because I'm going to have more time. I'm going to have more of an ability to, I'll be in a different setting, and we should embrace the ways that setting might be beneficial.
Yeah, so I guess I'll say in closing, this is me, Lex. I don't know what you want to do for the high holidays. I'm not planning to go to services. Maybe, I don't know. I'll probably take a peek to see what my local synagogue is doing. But I think I'd like to try to create something with some people. So if you're out there and you want to create something with me, and maybe with Lex if he wants to, then let me know, because I think that we need to start planning that now. And I think it, I want to create what I want to create. I just wanted to let people know what I want to create is the mammal version. So if what you're interested in is tweaking, then we'll try to launch a project for that too. But the project that I'm really interested in is the mammal version. I don't know what that involves exactly. In my mind right now, there's got some amazing music playlists. It involves going out alone into nature, and it involves something at the end of the day with some kind of collective call to action. Mostly that's what I've been gleaning out of Lex over the last hour. So there's probably a lot of other ideas out there, and I'd be really excited to work on that.
Yeah, I mean, look, that for me, that's what it is. The whole thing boils down to wake the hell up. But that's in the Torah. It's called Yom Teruah, day of noise making. Like that, to me, that's what it is. But yeah, I'm with you. And I'll personally, it's interesting. I will be leading a congregation, and actually, I'll be leading a congregation that is physically located in Hot Springs, Arkansas. I will likely not be. We'll see, but I will probably not be physically in Hot Springs, Arkansas. But that's not to say that I can't also participate in that, by the way. I think this year is a unique opportunity to cover multiple bases. And I don't think we should be shy or upset at ourselves if we hop. Like, I think there's this sense that, I'm supposed to go to like one thing and be fully in that service. And I think that it might be that people pop into your mammal version for a little bit and feel the need for their local congregation that's migrated online for a bit, like whatever. But we're going to close out, and we're going to keep this conversation going. I think there's a lot there to continue thinking about over the next few months. But just to close out the episode, we really, really do love hearing from you always. That was true before the coronavirus. And just like all of these accelerating changes, it has become more true now that we appreciate hearing from you. And you can do that in all of the following ways. You can contact us in all the following ways. First, there are our Facebook pages, Jewish Live, one word, Jewish Live, all one word, or Judaism Unbound. Second, there are our websites, jewishlive.org or judaismunbound.com. Third, there's our Judaism Unbound Twitter handle. And last but not least, there are our emails, dan@judaismunbound.com or lex@judaismunbound.com. The last request we like to make is that we really do appreciate any amount of financial donation that you're able to send our way. And you can do that via jewishlive.org/donate or judaismunbound.com/donate. So thank you for listening to this midweek episode. Whether you watched it live and saw us, hey everybody, or you listened afterwards, and stay tuned for what's coming in the near future. So with that, This has been Judaism Unbound.